All right, here we are, Chapter 2, The Great Floods. Noah, Adam and Eve, Vishnu, Osiris, what do they have in common? They represent eras, ages apart, and yet somehow they all join hands in the next cataclysm and walk with us. There are others who walk with us too, men of science, long forgotten. Those who first saw that these tumbles, these cataclysmic catastrophes, or revolutions of the Earth's shell have happened before, countless times. J. André Deluc in 1779 and Georges Cuvier in 1812 were the foremost. Dolomieu, the famous mineralogist, joined the consensus, as did Escher and Forel, the Swiss geologist, also J. André Deluc Jr. and von Buch. They all agreed that the cataclysms were caused by sudden revolutions in the wrong direction by the surface of the Earth. Cuvier, in his theory of the Earth, first published in 1812, based his conclusions on his unparalleled correlative research in stratigraphy, comparative anatomy, and paleontology. As a matter of fact, Cuvier was the founder of the science of comparative anatomy based on his pioneering, self-taught work in that field. At that time, he wrote, every part of the Earth, every hemisphere, every continent exhibits the same phenomena. There has, therefore, been a succession of variations in the economy of organic nature. The various catastrophes which have disturbed the strata have given rise to numerous shiftings of this continental basin. It is of much importance to work that these repeated eruptions and retreats of the sea have neither been slow nor gradual. On the contrary, most of the catastrophes which occasioned them have been sudden, and this is especially easy to be proved. With regard to the last of these catastrophes, I agree, therefore, with M.M. Deluc and Dolomieu in thinking that if anything in geology be established, it is that the surface of our globe has undergone a great and sudden revolution, the date of which cannot be much earlier than 5,000 or 6,000 years ago. Also, one preceding revolution at least had put the continents under water, perhaps 2 or 3 eruptions of the sea. Or irruptions. I guess that's sinking as opposed to flying up in the air. These alternations now appear to me to form the problem in geology that is of most importance to solve. In order to solve it satisfactorily, it would be necessary to discover the cause of these events. These ideas have haunted, I may almost say have tormented me, during my researches among fossil bones. Researches which embrace but a very small part of those phenomena of the age preceding the last general revolution of the globe, and which are yet intimately connected with all the others. Many attempts have been made to answer the charge made to the geological profession by Cuvier to explain these sudden revolutions in the wrong direction. Among others, Velikovsky, that is, Immanuel Velikovsky of the World in Collisions fame. We'll be looking at that book as well as part of this overall greater body of research that I'll be doing for this channel. But returning back to the text here, Velikovsky tried it through his studies of myths and legends. Hapgood tried it, Hugh Brown attempted, and in the process amassed a tremendous library of geological data. Every time the cataclysmic concept has risen, the beast has been stoned, burned at the stake, beaten to a pulp, and buried with a vengeance. But the corpse won't stay dead. Each time, it raises the lid of its coffin and says in sepulchral tones, "You will die before I." That is a bold statement made by Mr. Thomas here, but I see where he's coming from. The latest of the challengers is Professor Frank C. Hibben, who in his book, The Lost Americans, said this was no ordinary extinction of a vague geological period which fizzled to an uncertain end. This death was catastrophic and all-inclusive. What caused the death of 40 million animals, the corpus delicti in this mystery, may be found almost anywhere. Their bones lie bleaching in the sands of Florida and the gravels of New Jersey. The weather out of the dry terraces of Texas and protrude from the sticky ooze of the tar pits off Wilshire Boulevard in Los Angeles. The bodies of the victims are everywhere. We find literally thousands together, young and old, foal with dam, calf with cow. The muck pits of Alaska are filled with evidence of universal death. A picture of quick extinction. Any argument as to the cause must apply to North America, Siberia, and Europe as well. Mammoth and bison were torn and twisted as though by a cosmic hand in a godly rage. In many places, the Alaskan muck blanket is packed with animal bones and debris in trainload lots. Mammoth, mastodon, bison, horses, wolves, bears, and lions, a faunal population in the middle of some cataclysmic catastrophe, was suddenly frozen in a grim charade. Supernatural winds, volcanic burning, inundation and burial in muck, preservation by deep freeze of both torn up animals and muck. Any good solution to a consuming mystery must answer all of the facts, challenges Hibben. The challenge wouldn't leave me alone like a hunger. It gnawed at my subconscious. I could hear the deep tones of Cuvier's challenge. Find the cause of these events, still reverberating through the sacred halls of science. Ghostly, unanswered, I felt Hibben's challenge prodding. Answer all of the facts. I decided that this cataclysmic concept, this catastrophic end which visits our planet time after time, needed verification or refutation once and for all. The first step was to gather all of the known accepted data from as many sciences pertaining to our planet as possible. Stratigraphy, archaeology, radiology, anthropology, paleontology, and oceanography, plus cosmology and astronomy, and also seismology and oceanography, and Palico languages such as prehistoric Mayan. Even evolution could not be ignored. Further, cross-correlation of the data between the sciences had to be honored. All of the foregoing gave the answer, although there is enough data in most sciences to indicate that these cataclysms happen. There was not enough in each science to derive the process or prove the concept. But between science, cross-correlation showed indeed that the concept was true. Not only did it verify that the events have happened, but disclosed when the last 5 cataclysms were, and what positions the shell of the Earth has been in for the last 35,000 or more years. This was a first-time effort for certain. So after years of research beginning in 1949, Cuvier's challenge had an answer. Yes, indeed, cataclysms do happen, but I had not yet found the answer to his challenge. Find the cause of these events. It would take me 20 more years to find the cause. The trigger of cataclysms, what makes them start, and further, exactly what is it that happens after it starts? What is the process of a cataclysm? Finally, what is the timetable of cataclysms? It was obvious already from the data that it was not linear. Was it a mathematical function that we could derive from the data, or is it random and frustrating in its unpredictability? The more learned, the more to be discovered and learned. Meanwhile, what a chase, and what a dramatic story of the Earth's history we uncovered. Civilizations of more than 20,000 years ago, more advanced than our wildest imaginations. Prehistoric legends from Greece, Egypt, India, and South America, which became history instead of legend. Lost continents in the Atlantic and Pacific, which had become dated realities, with logical reasons for their sudden disappearance. Yes, Vishnu came alive, a man who lived through a cataclysm many thousands of years ago, actually 10 cataclysms ago. Now he is known as the Hindu god of 10 resurrections from the waters. Osiris was rediscovered. He was the Jesus of his time, a man of Egypt some 15,000 years ago. Noah smiled at us from the pages of the Epic of Gilgamesh. He actually was a Sumerian named Utnapishtim, who lived just around 7,000 years ago. The ark he built is more than legend. The process of a cataclysm is known now. Look at the cross-section of the Earth inside the front cover. You'll see 2 molten layers. The yellow ones, the important one, is the thin molten layer starting 60 miles down, extending 60 miles deeper to 120 miles below the surface of the Earth. The thick, deep molten layer Starting 1,800 miles down at the bottom of the mantle and extending 1,300 miles deeper is the outer core. Seismology has proven these two yellow layers to be molten, and they are white hot, over 2,500 degrees Fahrenheit. The outer 60-mile thick layer is the one which supplies the volcanoes with the molten lava they spew forth. Inside the Earth, the electrical and magnetic structure of the interior makes these layers act as if they were near solid or plastic. As long as the inferior magnetic and electrical structure of the Earth maintains its orderliness, this old Earth keeps on rotating on its axis in a normal manner. If anyone doubts that Antarctica's ice cap is growing, it has been proven that it is growing at the rate of a Lake Ontario per year. So is Greenland growing. Since they are not centered on the Earth's axis of rotation, they develop centrifugal forces coupling with each other in a direction perpendicular to the Earth's axis. It's like swinging a bucket of water around yourself on a rope. The water stays in the bucket. If you did not have the restraining rope, the bucket and water would fly away. In the case of the ice caps, the restraining rope is gravity, which keeps these two ice caps unlandlocked. Since these ice caps cannot fly away, they resolve their problem by trying to pull the entire shell of the Earth above the 60-mile thick molten layer around the interior of the Earth. And as long as the electrical and magnetic structure is maintained inside the Earth, the ice caps cannot pull the shell around to let them go to the equator. And we maintain our orderly, daily, monthly, yearly rotation. Right now, we don't know why. Every few thousand years on a varying timetable, the magnetical and electrical orderliness in the shallow molten layer is disorganized. Pausing there for a minute. So even back in 1963, when this book was first published, they at least understood and knew in some way that, like Mr. Thomas is saying, the orderliness of the electrical and magnetic structure of the planet itself kind of falls apart and declines. And we are in such a time now, folks, where the Earth's magnetosphere is so declined, in fact, that in earlier recordings of where the highest ceiling was, that is to say, how high up does the sky go before you hit the atmosphere, somewhere in the ballpark of 120 miles. You had to go from here to low Earth orbit. Now it's speculated to be no more or less than 80 miles. Just some food for thought there. Continuing on further, it is not known by what means it is disrupted. It has to be a way which lowers those energies to the extent that the shallow molten layer is allowed to act as a free liquid, letting the molten layer act as a molten liquid, which then serves as a lubricant for the ice caps to pull the shell around the Earth's interior, so as to have the ice caps shift about 90 degrees into the torrid zone. In 1/4 to 1/2 a day, the geographic poles move to the torrid zone and all hell lets loose. The atmosphere and the Earth's oceans and lakes don't shift with the shell. They just keep on rotating west to east, and at the equator that speed is about 1,037 miles per hour. I'll say that one more time. At the equator, the speed of the wind blowing is 1,037 miles per hour, according to Mr. Thomas here. It has to be normally to make one revolution per day. So while the shell shifts with the poles going to the equator, the winds and oceans continue eastward, blowing and flooding across the Earth at supersonic speeds, inundating continents with water miles deep, destroying everything with which man ever dealt, including himself. And that's just a summary of the process. Now, what about the trigger? This turned out to be the most elusive piece of the whole puzzle. We couldn't rely on some supernatural assumption, like sometime happenings in the heavens of a vague character which actually violated the laws of nature. No, it had to be something natural, a part of nature's ordinary structure, which disrupts the Earth's inner electrical and magnetic structure whenever a cataclysm happens. It also has to be a kind of happening which decreases the inner electrical and magnetic forces to the extent that they cannot support keeping the shallow molten layer acting as if it were plastic or near solid. I'm going to pause there again and give some commentary. Now on this channel, and specifically with this video series here, not necessarily the Adam and Eve story readings, but really just getting into my point, the electric universe model, and specifically that particular paradigm of physics and its scientific discipline, everything it has to offer. I think it has more to do with that. And back in Mr. Thomas's day, there was effectively and quintessentially not really any understanding of the universe as being electric. Really, I guess what my point is here is that the sun's magnetosphere collapses in on itself, which is more or less what controls and dictates our magnetosphere, because the two electromagnetic dynamos rather resonate and interact with each other in that way. And so I think it has more to do with the sun than what is postulated by Mr. Thomas here. And we'll get into that. So let me just go ahead and continue with reading the text here. We once thought that severe sunspots could be the cause because they do disrupt the Earth's inner electrical and magnetic structure, but we were wrong. I guess we'll see about that. The time wasted on that assumption was the price for dealing in assumptions rather than facts. It was a hard detour to take. What was necessary was to be patient, to take more time to assemble more facts, and use our most valuable tool, analytical reasoning. The solution, whatever it might be, would come, and the derivation of the process gave us a greater understanding of prehistoric events. For instance, you can see that ice ages are not a matter of advancing and retreating ice. It's simply that different areas of the Earth are in polar regions at different times, for different durations of time. Changes between positions take place in a fraction of a day, and the accompanying supersonic deluges deposit the various huge stratas we find in the walls of the Grand Canyon, the Painted Desert, Monument Valley, the mountains around Mexican Hat, Canyon de Chalet, and the Moki, I'm going to go ahead and say, and that's Moki Dugway. Go ahead and read up on that particular place in the meantime, because I don't even know anything about that location. Let's see here. The story around the world gives silent testimony. The Barasovka mammoth frozen in mud with buttercups in his mouth. In the next reading, I'm going to go ahead and show everybody a picture of that, which is actually absolutely astounding, for those of you who haven't seen that before. The age of the gorges below Niagara Falls and St. Anthony's Falls, both about 7,000 years. The sudden end of the Laurentian Basin ice cap in Canada, about 11,500 years ago. The uninterrupted evolution on the Galapagos, over 11,000 years. The geological datings in the Murrumbidgee River Basin system in Australia, showing the end of an ice cap there about 11,500 years ago. Ooh. The age of fossil bones taken from the Wilshire Boulevard tar pits, over 11,000 years. The sudden end of all work in the prehistoric city of Tiahuanacu, Bolivia, 11,500 years ago. Leonard Woolley's great work in the Holy Land, dating Noah's flood at about 6,000 years ago. The end of the Wisconsin ice cap, about 29,000 years ago. The sudden 200-foot rise of the oceans all over the world, about 7,000 years ago. The sudden rise of the St. Lawrence riverbed, about 7,000 years ago. The changing levels of the shoreline of the Hudson Bay in Canada. The huge granite blocks from the Alps sitting on the eastern slopes of the Jura Mountains at 4,000 feet above sea level. The great legendarian Fraser's uncovering of over 8,000 verified separate inundation survival legends in the Malay Peninsula region. The Pejark Marsh in Australia, which shows a quick extinction of many, many species, including humans, 11,500 years ago. The Piri-Reis map showing the North Pole in Egypt. I didn't know that. I didn't know the Piri-Reis map showed the North Pole in Egypt. You have to look at that again. The Egyptian water clock showing agreement with the Piri-Reis map. Granite on top of the mountains around Death Valley in California. The great stratifications of the Grand Canyon, Painted Desert, Monument Valley, and Badlands, each layer homogeneous, showing it to be deposited there suddenly by fantastic amounts of super swift water. The present growth of the Antarctic ice cap, approximately 293 cubic miles of ice per year. And those of you who are into the global warming as it is presented in the media, no, it is not shrinking. It is, in fact, growing still. There is more ice packing on there every year. Every time the Clinton News Network tries to show you that, oh my God, Greenland is melting, the North Sea is melting. No, it's not. It does that every summer. And every winter, it packs on more ice, and every winter, it packs on more and more and more ice. And this year, in fact, this being 2019, the North Sea Passage never actually melted to the point where shipping could be done at all this winter. There was so much ice packed in that trade was effectively suspended going through the North Sea and the North Sea Passage because it never shrank down through the summer. So just consider that, those of you who think that the polar bears are going to go extinct. And yes, National Geographic did lie to us about that also. So I'll prove that later on in another video as well. Continuing on. The legends from primitive man in Tierra del Fuego, that's Guatemala. They had a really bad eruption earlier last year. At the southern tip of South America, of the day the sun set in the wrong direction. Rewind. The legends from primitive man in Tierra del Fuego at the southern tip of South America of the day the sun set in the wrong direction. Huh. Oh, can you imagine that happening? That's really freaky. I would hate to see that. The legends from primitive man in Peru of the day the sun stood still. The legends from Malayan and Sumatran tribal aborigines of the long night. Yeah, okay. So the sun sets in the wrong direction. Sun sets in the wrong direction. Peruvians perceive the sun standing still. And then people further west, as we understand direction of movement, not necessarily in the context of this cataclysm, they experienced a quote-unquote long night. Yeah, these legends seem to correlate with each other, as opposed, if the hemisphere we're in had the sun stand still and set in the wrong direction, then the western, or rather far east, in that Pacific region, they would have experienced a rather long night. So I guess that adds up. And especially if the North Pole was in fact in Egypt, then that would give Mr. Thomas here some vindication as to his hypothesis that perhaps the crust does shift up to a whole 90 degrees. So we'll go ahead and look into that later, but the real reason why you're here now is so that you can read this here Adam and Eve story with me. So we'll go back to that. The VARV, or Earth strata, counts in Wrenshall, Minnesota, and Hackensack, New Jersey, which confirm with each other. Prevalence of jade in the Orient, which is material heaved up from the mantle near equatorial pivot points during a cataclysm. So I guess that's where he figured that China would sink into the earth. Makes sense. The fantastic evidence of burgeoning tropical plants in Arctic Siberia, Alaska, and Antarctica, frozen and preserved for thousands of years in a fraction of a day during a cataclysm. And yeah, that is also very well known, that those regions have apparently tropical flora and fauna. And that wouldn't be possible even if these regions shifted only 20 or 40 degrees, based on the article I read in the biography of Chan Thomas. You don't suppose that would be possible, considering that the tropic region is really nearest to the equator. So maybe Antarctica really is Atlantis. I don't know. Anyway, the similarity of languages the world over, from Polynesian to Greek, which basically are the same language, weirdly enough, to Egyptian, to Mayan, to Eskimo, to Yakut, to Oriental, and more. The footprints of dinosaurs imprinted in beds of exposed river mud, frozen before the prints could deteriorate, remaining frozen for thousands of years to allow the mud prints to ossify for us to see as dinosaur footprints in rock beds today. Correlation of ice ages, stone ages, and quick extinctions of all species the world over. The survival of primitive life at the equatorial pivot points, the last two being the Malay Peninsula and the Galapagos, both now rife with lizards. The existence of a coral reef on the floor of the Arctic Ocean. Yeah, another thing that could only be found in tropical regions. But then again, you got the Great Barrier Reef off the coast of Australia, and that would not necessarily be in a totally tropical region, and that would fall in with Hapgood's hypothesis, more or less vindicating that, no, we only shift about 20 to 40 degrees, not a whole 90. That's why we're doing this, is we need to really investigate this and really figure it out. And we're going to be tying Electric Universe into this, so hopefully we add to that overall bigger picture. And more and more and more and more give us a prehistoric picture of the positions of the Earth's shell during the past 35,000 or more years. The overwhelming evidence, when put in order, gives us a dramatic picture of which areas have been at the North Pole, when they moved to the pole, when they moved away from the pole, and how long they were there. The chart is on the next page. Notice that the end of an era is the same as the start of the next era. Although the chart is in terms of years ago and years duration, do remember that the change from one era to the next occurs in a fraction of a day, short enough to be called abrupt. Go ahead and cover this before we finish this chapter up. We did it. Areas at North Pole is the left side of the graph here. And then the first set of data in years is when the age started, when it ends, and the duration. And so starting with the Arctic Ocean, excuse me, we have a start for that being 7,000 years ago. And an end and a duration, well, that history is still being written. So, excuse me, again, have hiccups here. That story is still being written. So we'll yet see when exactly a new ice age begins and whether or not we have a earth crust shifting cataclysm in between then. But we do most certainly have to tolerate and survive the effects of the grand solar minimum before this happens. We'll definitely have glaciation and icing happening within 20 years, which is when it's postulated the next supernova event will occur. Something else we got to get into. Don't worry, we'll touch on that later. But let's go ahead and finish out this graph, going back in time now to where the North Pole was apparently in the Sudan Basin, which would, I guess, put the North Pole in Egypt 11,500 years ago, ending at the start of the present era 7,000 years ago, for a duration of only about 4,500 years. Then the North Pole shifted to the Hudson Bay. This is going backwards in time, of course. The start of that era was 18,500 years ago and ended 11,500 years ago, to where the shift went over to the Sudan Basin for a duration of 7,000 years. And then going back 29,000 years, we have the North Pole being in the Caspian Sea, and that ended, of course, shifting to the Hudson Bay 18,500 years ago. And that duration lasted somewhere between 10,000 and 500 years. And then I guess what is not known going further back, it's not really well known from the 29,000 year going backward from our point in time. It's not really known when that start happened, but we know it ended 29,000 years ago. So we don't know when that particular age started, but there's also no real known duration in years. But there is a fluctuation. There's no set pattern of duration for which we can expect to have total stability. When the North Pole was in Egypt, it only lasted there 4,500 years. And when it was in the Caspian Sea, that would seem to be the longest amount of time that it lasted being in one position with little or no migration, being about 10,500 years of duration. And that's half the amount of time, a little less than half the amount of time it spent in Egypt. So, yeah, this can be really hard to predict, really, except knowing exactly when the cataclysms will occur. But as a final note here from Mr. Thomas, yes, Noah, Adam, and Eve, Osiris, Ta'ara, Zeus, and Vishnu have much deeper meaning now. And as they join hands and walk with us, we hear Adam and Eve saying, "Listen, for now we can truly share our story with you." And that begins the next chapter, titled The Story, Enigma, Pursuit, and Unraveling, which we will cover in the next video. Thank you for staying on board with me. This is one of the longer chapters in the book. And as we finish this next chapter here, coming up to the end of the next chapter, we'll be crossing the Rubicon, really, to be frank. We're getting into the area of the book that is still to this day classified, rather. The rest of the book from page about 54 onward is still quote-unquote sanitized. If you go to the CIA.gov vault, you can still only read up to page 54 of this text. So I hope you'll be there with me when we cross the Rubicon and find out what exactly is it the CIA does not want us to know. Please like, share, and subscribe. And please especially share. This information is very riveting and I think important. You guys have a great day. Be seeing you again. Thank you.